When 16-year-old Tasha Henderson's baby brother is born prematurely, she faces a heart-wrenching decision. With her mother, Maya, struggling with addiction and their family on the verge of collapse, Tasha is thrust into a fight to save her brother and herself. As she navigates a broken system, unexpected help comes from a determined firefighter and a compassionate social worker. But as secrets unravel and the stakes grow higher, Tasha's courage is tested like never before. Will her strength and determination be enough to heal her fractured family? Or will the weight of the past tear them apart for good? Dive into this emotional story of resilience and hope. If Tasha's journey speaks to you, hit that subscribe button and tell us in the comments, what would you do in her shoes? The fire station buzzed with the familiar rhythm of a small-town morning. Captain Emily Carter poured herself a fresh cup of coffee, her eyes scanning the room, taking in the casual banter among her team. She'd been in Clearbrook long enough to appreciate these quiet moments before the unpredictability of the day began. Suddenly, the front door slammed open. The sound, abrupt and desperate, silenced the room instantly. Emily's head whipped around, and she saw her, a young girl, barely 16, standing frozen in the doorway. Dark curls framed her face, but her eyes were what held Emily's attention, wide, frantic, and full of fear. In her arms, the girl clutched a bundle of blankets tightly, her knuckles white from the effort. Emily's instincts kicked in immediately. She set down her mug and moved toward the girl, careful to keep her movements slow and deliberate. "Hey there," Emily said gently, her voice soft but clear. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" The girl's lips trembled, but she didn't speak. Her gaze darted around the room, taking in the firefighters who were now all on alert, watching her every move. She took a hesitant step forward, then another, and Emily could see her trembling. Behind her, Emily heard Mike, her second in command, step forward, his burly frame crouching slightly to seem less intimidating. "Is that your pet in the blanket, sweetheart? It's okay. We can help." The girl shook her head, and a tear slipped down her cheek. Still no words came. "You're safe here," Emily reassured her, stepping closer. "Can you show me what's in the blanket?" The girl hesitated, her arms tightening protectively around the bundle. But after a long moment, she slowly began to loosen her grip. Emily, now close enough to see the terror and anguish on her face, gently pulled back a corner of the blanket. Her breath caught in her throat. Nestled inside, barely moving, was a newborn baby. The room seemed to still. Emily's heart pounded, but her years of training kept her focused. "Mike, get the med kit. Lisa, call for an ambulance." The baby's skin was bluish and its breaths were shallow, irregular. It was impossibly small, clearly premature, and Emily's mind raced as she tried to assess the severity of the situation. She carefully cradled the baby, wrapping him tighter in the blanket for warmth. "Jack, get some warm towels. Now." As the team sprang into action, Emily glanced at the girl who stood frozen by the door, her eyes wide and filled with unshed tears. "Hey, it's okay, we've got him. You did the right thing by bringing him here," Emily said, her voice soft and reassuring. "What's your name?" The girl swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper. "Tasha. And the baby? Is he your brother?" Tasha nodded, tears finally spilling over. He was born this morning. Too early. I didn't know what to do. My mom, she doesn't know I'm here." Emily's heart sank as she realized the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just about a premature baby. This was about a family in crisis, and they were only beginning to scratch the surface. A few days before that frantic morning at the fire station, Tasha stood in the cramped kitchen of her apartment, staring at the clock. Her hands trembled as she washed the last dish from dinner. Her mother, Maya, hadn't left her room all day. The apartment was quiet except for the faint hum of the fridge. Tasha hated the quiet. It made everything feel heavier. Every responsibility, every burden fell squarely on her 16-year-old shoulders. She wiped her hands on a towel and glanced toward the closed bedroom door. Maya had been in a bad place for months, slipping deeper into a fog that Tasha couldn't pull her out of. Addiction had always been the shadow in their home, lurking behind every failed promise and missed opportunity. But now, with the baby coming, everything felt worse. Maya had hidden the pregnancy from everyone for as long as she could, even from Tasha. It wasn't until Maya's belly started to swell and the whispers around town grew louder that Tasha finally learned the truth. Her mother was pregnant, and the father was long gone. Tasha knocked softly on the door. "Mom? Are you okay?" No answer. Her heart sank. She had been asking that same question for months, and the answer was always the same. Silence. She opened the door a crack and peeked inside. Maya lay curled up on the bed, her back to the door. The room was dark, the air thick with the scent of old laundry and stale cigarettes. "Mom?" Tasha's voice was small, trembling. She stepped inside, her feet sinking into the worn carpet as she moved closer. "You should eat something." Maya stirred but didn't respond. Tasha stood there for a moment, watching her mother's frail form. Maya had always been beautiful once, with bright eyes and a warm smile that lit up any room. But that woman was long gone, replaced by someone Tasha barely recognized. She turned to leave, but just as she reached the door, she heard it. The soft sound of crying. It was Maya, her shoulders shaking as quiet sobs filled the room. Tasha's heart broke. She wanted to help, but she didn't know how. She had spent so long pretending to be strong, to be the one who held everything together. But she was just a kid. She didn't know how to save her mother. Back at the fire station, Tasha watched as the firefighters worked quickly, their movements efficient and practiced. They didn't hesitate, didn't second-guess themselves. They just acted, as if they'd been trained for this exact moment 1,000 times before. But Tasha's mind was a blur. Her heart raced, her hands shaking as she wrapped her arms around herself, trying to stay grounded. She didn't know these people. She didn't know if she could trust them. All she knew was that Isaiah, her baby brother, was barely clinging to life, and she had no idea what would happen next. Captain Emily came over, her face calm but focused. "Tasha, you did the right thing. We're going to get your brother the help he needs, okay? But I need you to tell me everything. We need to know what we're dealing with." Tasha swallowed hard. Her throat felt tight, like she could barely breathe. "He was born this morning," she whispered. "At home. My mom. She was too scared to go to the hospital. She told me not to call anyone." Emily's brows furrowed in concern. Why was she scared? Tasha hesitated, biting her lip. She didn't want to betray her mother, but she couldn't lie. Not now. "My mom. She's had problems. She's not supposed to have custody of me. But I didn't know what else to do. Isaiah wasn't breathing right. I thought he was going to die." Emily's heart broke for the girl standing in front of her, caught between loyalty to a mother who had failed her and the desperate need to save her brother. She placed a hand on Tasha's shoulder, offering a gentle squeeze. "You were brave to come here, Tasha. You saved his life by getting him help." Tasha blinked, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to spill. She wasn't brave. She was scared, terrified, really. She had never felt so small, so powerless. As the sound of sirens filled the air, signaling the arrival of the ambulance, Emily turned back to her team. "All right, let's get the baby stabilized. We're heading to Clearbrook General." As they prepared to transport Isaiah, Emily made a quick decision. She turned to Mike, her second in command. "Call Officer Jake Collins. Tell him we've got a situation involving a minor. We're going to need some legal guidance on this one." Mike nodded and got to work while Emily focused on getting Tasha and the baby safely to the hospital. But in the back of her mind, she knew this was just the beginning. The secrets that Tasha had been carrying were about to come out, and the fallout would be intense. The ambulance ride was a blur of flashing lights and urgent voices. Tasha sat in the back, clutching the edges of the seat, her eyes glued to Isaiah's tiny form as the paramedics worked to stabilize him. His chest rose and fell with shallow, uneven breaths, and the sight made Tasha's heart pound painfully in her chest. Next to her, Emily sat with a calming presence, trying to keep Tasha grounded. "He's a fighter," Emily said softly, her eyes full of reassurance. "We're doing everything we can for him." Tasha nodded, but she couldn't shake the gnawing fear that had taken hold of her. What if it wasn't enough? What if Isaiah didn't make it? She couldn't lose him, not after everything. When they arrived at the hospital, the paramedics rushed Isaiah inside, disappearing into the flurry of doctors and nurses. Tasha and Emily followed close behind, but soon they were ushered into a waiting area. Tasha paced the small room, wringing her hands. Emily watched her for a moment before standing. "Tasha, I need to make a call," she said gently. "We need to involve the authorities in this. It's standard procedure, but it's going to be okay. I'll stay with you every step of the way." Tasha's stomach dropped. She knew what that meant. Social services, foster care, being taken away from her mother again. "You're going to take him away, aren't you, Isaiah? They'll take him, won't they?" Emily shook her head. "Right now we're focused on getting him the care he needs. But we do need to get Officer Jake involved. He's a friend of mine. He can help us navigate this, make sure you and your brother are taken care of." Tasha wanted to trust her, but fear clawed at her chest. She had heard those words before, and they never led to anything good. As the day stretched on, Tasha's mind was consumed by the weight of everything she had done. Word had spread quickly through the small town of Clearbrook, and by the afternoon, it seemed like everyone knew about the Henderson family's crisis. At the hospital, Tasha caught whispers from nurses, glances from strangers who passed through the hallways. They all knew, and that knowledge felt like a heavy stone pressing down on her. Maya didn't know yet. She was still at home, oblivious to the fact that her secret had unraveled in the most public way possible. Tasha dreaded what would happen when her mother found out. Maya would be angry, no, furious, and Tasha didn't know if she had the strength to face that. Just as she was sinking further into her own spiral of fear and guilt, Sarah Jenkins, their neighbor, appeared at the hospital. She approached Tasha cautiously, her face etched with sympathy. "Tasha," Sarah said softly, "I heard what happened. I just wanted to see if you were okay." Tasha blinked in surprise. She hadn't expected anyone to come check on her, especially not Sarah. She barely knew her. "I don't know if I'm okay," Tasha admitted, her voice trembling. "Everything's falling apart. I don't know what to do." Sarah nodded, her expression gentle. "I've been where you are, sweetie. I know what it's like to feel like the whole world is crashing down around you, but you're stronger than you think." Tasha frowned, unsure of what Sarah meant. "How could you know what this is like?" Sarah's eyes softened with understanding. "Because I've been there. I struggled with addiction too, years ago, and I made a lot of mistakes. But I got help, and I'm still here." Tasha stared at her, absorbing the words. She hadn't known that about Sarah. She hadn't known that someone so normal, so put together, could have been through something like that. Sarah reached out and squeezed Tasha's hand gently. "You're not alone, Tasha. Whatever happens, you don't have to face this on your own." Tasha sat in the hospital waiting room, the harsh fluorescent lights flickering overhead. Time seemed to drag on forever, each second stretching into eternity. Captain Emily Carter had gone to check on Isaiah, and the silence around her pressed heavily, broken only by the occasional murmur of nurses and the beep of medical equipment down the hallway. Tasha's mind drifted back to the days before Isaiah's birth. Her mother, Maya, had once been a vibrant woman with an infectious laugh. But that was before addiction. Before everything began to spiral out of control. It started when Tasha was 8. Maya had lost her job at a local diner, and Tasha had come home from school to find her mother sobbing in the kitchen. Over the next few months, Maya had begun disappearing at odd hours, returning home glassy-eyed and barely able to speak. Tasha had been too young to understand at the time, but as she grew older, the signs became clearer. Pills, alcohol. Days when Maya would disappear for hours, leaving Tasha alone to fend for herself. The worst day came when Tasha was 10. She had woken up to find Maya unconscious on the living room floor, an empty bottle of pills beside her. Tasha panicked, calling 911 as she screamed and shook her mother, begging her to wake up. Maya survived, but after that, everything changed. Child Protective Services had been called in, and Tasha was taken away from her mother for the first time. She bounced around foster homes for 2 years before being placed with her grandmother, who had done her best to provide a stable home. But when her grandmother passed away last year, Tasha was left with nowhere to go. Somehow, despite the system's hesitations, Maya had managed to regain custody of Tasha. At first, it had seemed like things might get better. Maya had promised that she was clean, that she was ready to be a good mother again. But Tasha had known the truth. She had seen the signs, the late-night phone calls, the shady people coming in and out of their apartment. Maya had tried to hide it. But Tasha wasn't a child anymore. She knew what addiction looked like. When Maya discovered she was pregnant, the fear in her eyes had been unmistakable. Tasha still remembered the night her mother had finally broken down, sobbing into her hands as she confessed that she couldn't handle it. "I can't do this, Tasha," Maya had said, her voice barely audible. "I'm not strong enough." Tasha had promised to help, to be there for her mother, but deep down she had known that Maya was right. She wasn't strong enough. And now, with Isaiah fighting for his life in the NICU, Tasha feared that no matter how hard she tried, she wouldn't be enough either. When Emily returned, she sat down beside Tasha and handed her a cup of water. "The doctors are working on stabilizing Isaiah," she said gently. "He's in critical condition, but they're doing everything they can." Tasha nodded, clutching the cup tightly in her hands. Her throat was dry and she couldn't bring herself to drink. She didn't want to feel relief just yet, not until she knew Isaiah would make it. "Can I see him?" Tasha's voice trembled, barely above a whisper. Emily hesitated for a moment before nodding. "I'll talk to the doctors, but I think it'll be okay for you to visit him soon. He's still very fragile, so they'll want to limit contact." Tasha nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She felt the weight of her guilt pressing down on her. If she had called for help sooner, maybe Isaiah wouldn't be in such a precarious condition. She should have taken action the moment her mother went into labor. She should have done more. "I didn't know what else to do," Tasha whispered, her voice cracking. "I didn't know who to call. I thought I could save him, but I'm not strong enough." Emily reached over and gently placed a hand on Tasha's shoulder. "Tasha, you did the best you could. You brought him here, and that might have saved his life. That takes strength." Tasha shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "I was scared. I didn't want to get my mom in trouble. I didn't want anyone to find out. But now I think I made it worse." Emily squeezed her shoulder, her voice calm and steady. "Bravery isn't about not being scared. It's about doing what needs to be done, even when you are scared. And that's exactly what you did. You saved your brother's life by bringing him to us." Tasha sniffled, wiping her tears on her sleeve. She wanted to believe Emily, but the weight of everything she had kept inside for so long was too much. She had been carrying the burden of her mother's addiction, the secret of the pregnancy, and the responsibility of taking care of her family. Now, she didn't know how to keep it all together. Hours later, Tasha stood at the window of the NICU, staring through the glass at her baby brother. Isaiah lay in a small incubator, tubes and wires attached to his tiny body. His chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, and every few seconds, the machines beeped softly, monitoring his vital signs. Tasha pressed her hand to the glass, her heart aching. She couldn't bear to see him like this, so fragile and vulnerable. It wasn't fair. He hadn't asked to be brought into the world under these circumstances, and now he was fighting for every breath. A nurse approached, and with a kind smile, she led Tasha into the NICU, explaining the protocols for visiting. As Tasha stood beside Isaiah's incubator, she placed her hand gently on the glass, wishing she could hold him. "Tasha." She turned to see Emily entering the room, followed by a woman in a professional suit. The woman smiled warmly, but there was seriousness in her eyes. "This is Jenna Perez," Emily said softly. "She's a social worker, here to talk with you about what happens next." Tasha's stomach clenched. She had known this was coming, but that didn't make it any easier. Jenna walked over and knelt down beside Tasha, her voice gentle and understanding. "I know this is overwhelming, Tasha," Jenna began, "but I'm here to help. We need to figure out the best plan for you and Isaiah." Tasha nodded slowly, her throat tight. She knew what that meant. CPS would be involved. There would be investigations. They would ask about her mother's addiction, about her home life, about the circumstances of Isaiah's birth. And then they would decide whether she and her brother could stay together. "My mom, she's been struggling," Tasha said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "She's been using again. I don't know if she can take care of us." Jenna's expression softened with empathy. "Thank you for being honest with me, Tasha. That's the first step. Right now, we need to focus on getting Isaiah the care he needs, and we're going to do everything we can to make sure you and your brother stay together. But we also need to address your mom's situation." Tasha swallowed hard. She didn't want to betray her mother, but she couldn't lie. Not anymore. The next day, Tasha sat in a small room at the hospital, waiting for Maya to arrive. Jenna had arranged for a meeting between Tasha, Maya, and herself to discuss the situation. Emily had offered to be there for support, and Officer Jake Collins, the local police officer who had been called to investigate, was on standby. Tasha's heart pounded in her chest. She hadn't seen her mother since she had left for the fire station that morning. Maya had no idea what had happened, and Tasha dreaded how she would react. When the door finally opened, Maya walked in, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She looked frail, her clothes hanging loosely on her frame, and there was an air of desperation about her. "Tasha," Maya said softly, her voice trembling. She crossed the room and pulled Tasha into a tight hug. "I'm so sorry, baby. I didn't know what else to do." Tasha froze for a moment before slowly returning the hug. "Mom, Isaiah's in the NICU. He's really small. The doctors are doing everything they can, but he's not out of the woods yet." Maya nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I should have gone to the hospital. I should have called someone. But I was scared, Tasha. I was so scared they would take him away." Jenna stepped forward, her voice gentle but firm. "Maya, I understand that fear, but we need to address the situation honestly if we're going to move forward." Maya sat down, wringing her hands together. "I've made so many mistakes. I'm not fit to be a mother. I couldn't even take care of myself, and now I've put both my children in danger." Tasha watched her mother, torn between anger and sympathy. She wanted to yell at her, to scream that this was all her fault, but at the same time, she could see the pain in Maya's eyes, the deep regret that weighed on her. "We're going to need to make some tough decisions," Jenna said gently. "Maya, we're recommending that you enter a treatment program for your addiction. In the meantime, Tasha and Isaiah's care will need to be handled through social services." Maya's eyes widened in fear. "You're going to take them away from me?" Jenna shook her head. "Our goal is always to reunite families when it's safe to do so. But you need to get help, Maya. You need to show that you're committed to making the necessary changes." Maya's face crumpled, and she buried her face in her hands. "I don't know if I can do it." Tasha's heart clenched. She had never seen her mother so broken, but she also knew that something had to change. She couldn't keep living like this, waiting for the next disaster to strike. Tasha took a deep breath, her voice steady but trembling. "Mom, if you don't go to treatment, if you don't get help, they're going to take Isaiah and me away for good, and I can't do this alone. I need you to fight for us." Maya looked up at her daughter, tears streaming down her face. "I don't want to lose you," she whispered. Tasha's eyes softened, but her resolve remained. "Then you have to get better, Mom. For Isaiah, for me." The room was quiet after Tasha's plea. Maya sat motionless, her face pale and drawn. The weight of her choices bore down on her, heavier than anything she had ever felt. For a long moment she didn't speak, didn't move. The fear of losing her children paralyzed her. But the thought of entering rehab, the thought of confronting the demons she had spent years avoiding, was almost too much to bear. "I don't know if I can do this," Maya whispered, her voice cracking. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Tasha stood there, her heart breaking. She had spent years trying to protect her mother, trying to hold their fragile family together. But now, with Isaiah's life on the line, she knew that she couldn't do it alone. Emily stepped forward, her voice calm and steady. "Maya, I know it feels impossible right now, but getting help is the first step. You don't have to do this alone. There are people who want to help you, but you have to take that step." Maya looked up, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She glanced at Tasha and then at Emily, before nodding slowly. "I'll go," she whispered. "I'll go to treatment." Tasha felt a wave of relief wash over her, but the tension in her chest remained. She knew that this was only the beginning. There would be no easy fix, no quick solution. Maya had a long road ahead of her, and there were no guarantees that she would make it. But for now, it was enough. Tasha clung to the small spark of hope that had ignited within her. Later that evening, after Maya had agreed to enter a treatment program, Emily drove Tasha home. The streets of Clearbrook were quiet, the sun setting behind the rows of small houses that lined the streets. As they pulled up to the apartment, Emily turned to Tasha, her expression filled with concern. "You're going to be okay, Tasha," she said gently. "This is the right step. Your mom is getting the help she needs, and we're going to make sure you and Isaiah are taken care of." Tasha nodded, though the fear still gnawed at her insides. What if it's not enough? What if she can't get better? Emily sighed, her voice soft. "It's going to be hard, no doubt. But you've been incredibly strong, Tasha. You've done everything you can to help your brother and your mom. And no matter what happens, you won't be alone in this." Tasha swallowed hard, trying to hold back the tears. She wanted to believe Emily, but the uncertainty of the future weighed heavily on her. She didn't know if she had the strength to keep going. But for Isaiah's sake, she knew she had to try. The next morning, Tasha woke to the sound of her phone buzzing. She squinted at the screen and saw a message from Jenna Perez, the social worker who had visited them the day before. The message was clear. She needed to come back to the hospital for a meeting with Child Protective Services, CPS. Tasha's heart pounded as she read the text. She had known this moment was coming, but now that it was here, the fear gnawed at her insides. CPS meant evaluations, investigations, and decisions about whether she and Isaiah could stay together. She had spent so much of her life fearing that knock on the door, knowing that they were one slip away from losing everything. She dressed quickly and made her way to the hospital, where Jenna and Captain Emily Carter were waiting. As she entered the small, sterile meeting room, Tasha felt a pit of dread settling in her stomach. Officer Jake Collins sat at the table, looking through paperwork, his expression serious, but not unkind. "Thanks for coming in, Tasha," Jenna said gently, offering her a seat. "I know this is overwhelming, but we're going to work through this together." Tasha nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "What's going to happen now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jenna took a deep breath. "We need to assess the situation and make a plan for you and Isaiah. Right now, he's still in the NICU, and that gives us a little bit of time to figure things out. Your mom has agreed to enter rehab, which is a good step, but we'll need to put some measures in place to make sure Isaiah and you are in a stable environment." Tasha's chest tightened. She had known this was coming, but hearing the words made it feel so much more real. "Are you going to take him away?" she asked, her voice trembling. Jenna's expression softened. "Our goal is always to keep families together when it's safe to do so. But we also have to consider what's best for Isaiah and for you. We'll need to place Isaiah in foster care for the time being until we can determine your mother's progress in treatment and ensure that she can provide a safe environment." Tasha's heart sank. Foster care? But I'm his sister. I can take care of him. I've been taking care of him. Jenna hesitated, glancing at Emily for support. "Tasha, I know you've been doing an incredible job, but you're still a minor yourself. You've been through a lot, and you shouldn't have to carry this burden alone." Tasha felt tears well up in her eyes, and she quickly wiped them away. "I can't let him go into foster care," she whispered. "I'll lose him." Emily leaned forward, her voice calm but firm. "Tasha, I know this is hard, but you're not going to lose Isaiah. We're going to make sure he's placed in a home where he's safe and cared for, and we'll work with CPS to make sure you can visit him and stay involved." Tasha shook her head, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on her. "I don't want to be separated from him," she said softly. "He's all I have." Jenna placed a hand on Tasha's arm, her voice filled with empathy. "Tasha, I promise you, this isn't the end. This is just the beginning of figuring out how to rebuild your family. Your mom is getting help and you're doing everything you can for your brother. We're going to work with you to make sure you're both okay." Tasha sniffled, nodding slowly. It felt like her whole world was slipping through her fingers, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The days that followed were a blur of hospital visits, paperwork, and meetings with social workers. Tasha spent every moment she could by Isaiah's side in the NICU, watching as the doctors worked to stabilize him. His tiny body was connected to so many machines, and every day felt like a battle. But slowly, there were signs of improvement. Isaiah's breathing became steadier, his skin lost its bluish tint, and the doctors were cautiously optimistic. Despite the fear and uncertainty surrounding their situation, there were small moments of hope. One afternoon, as Tasha sat beside Isaiah's incubator, she saw his tiny hand move for the first time. It was just a small twitch, but it filled her heart with a warmth she hadn't felt in weeks. She leaned in closer, watching as Isaiah's fingers curled and uncurled, and for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, Things would be okay. Later that day, Jenna stopped by the NICU to check on Tasha. She sat beside her, her voice gentle but serious. "I've been talking with CPS and we've found a potential foster placement for Isaiah. It's a temporary situation, but it's a good home. They're experienced with premature infants, and they'll be able to provide the care he needs until your mom is ready." Tasha's stomach twisted at the thought of handing Isaiah over to strangers, but she knew there was no other option. She wasn't old enough to take full custody, and her mother wasn't in any position to care for him. "Will I be able to see him?" Tasha asked, her voice shaky. Jenna nodded. "Yes, we'll arrange for regular visits, and you'll be involved in every step of the process. This isn't a permanent separation, Tasha. It's just until your family is ready." Tasha bit her lip, feeling the familiar sting of tears in her eyes. She had heard promises like this before, but this time felt different. This time she wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for Isaiah too. As they talked, Emily arrived, bringing with her a sense of calm and reassurance. She had been by Tasha's side through every step of the process, offering guidance and support when things felt overwhelming. Tasha didn't know what she would have done without her. "Hey," Emily said softly as she approached. "How's Isaiah doing today?" Tasha managed a small smile. "He moved his hand," she said, her voice filled with cautious hope. "It's not much, but it's something." Emily smiled, her eyes soft with understanding. "That's a big deal, Tasha. Every little milestone counts." Tasha nodded, feeling a small spark of hope ignited in her chest. Maybe things weren't completely hopeless after all. A few days later, Tasha stood outside her apartment waiting for Sarah Jenkins to arrive. The older woman had offered to take her out for lunch, and though Tasha was reluctant to leave Isaiah's side, she knew she needed a break from the constant anxiety that had been weighing her down. When Sarah pulled up in her beat-up old car, Tasha climbed in, her body feeling heavy with exhaustion. She hadn't slept well in days, her mind constantly racing with thoughts of Isaiah and her mother. "How are you holding up, kiddo?" Sarah asked, her voice kind as she pulled out of the driveway. Tasha shrugged, staring out the window. "I don't know. Everything just feels overwhelming." Sarah nodded, her eyes focused on the road. "I get that. When you're dealing with so much at once, it can feel like you're drowning, but you're stronger than you think." Tasha glanced over at her, a frown tugging at her lips. "I don't feel strong. I feel like I'm barely holding on." Sarah sighed softly, her voice filled with empathy. "You know, when I was your age, I went through something pretty similar. My mom was an addict too. She tried to hide it, tried to act like everything was fine, but it wasn't. I had to grow up fast, just like you." Tasha's eyes widened in surprise. She hadn't known that about Sarah. She had always thought of her neighbor as someone who had it all together. "I'm not telling you this to make you feel bad," Sarah continued, her voice gentle. "I'm telling you because I want you to know that you're not alone. What you're going through, I've been there, and it's hard, but you'll get through it." Tasha blinked back tears, feeling a lump rise in her throat. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear those words. "How did you do it?" she asked softly. "How did you get through it?" Sarah smiled sadly. "I found help. I leaned on the people around me, and I learned that it's okay to ask for help when you need it." Tasha nodded, her heart heavy with emotion. She had spent so long trying to be strong for her family, trying to hold everything together. But maybe it was time to let others help her too. As they drove through the small town, Sarah pointed out a few landmarks and shared stories about her own childhood, lightening the mood. Tasha found herself laughing at some of the stories, momentarily forgetting the weight of her own situation. By the time they returned to the apartment, Tasha felt lighter, as though a small part of the burden had been lifted from her shoulders. "Thanks for today," Tasha said as she got out of the car. "I didn't realize how much I needed this." Sarah smiled warmly. "Anytime, kiddo. You've got a lot on your plate, but don't forget to take care of yourself too." Tasha nodded, feeling a newfound sense of strength. Maybe things were hard right now, but with the right support, she knew she could get through it. As the days turned into weeks, Tasha found herself settling into a new routine. Isaiah was still in the NICU, but he was getting stronger every day. The doctors were hopeful that he would be able to go home soon, and Tasha clung to that hope like a lifeline. In the meantime, she threw herself into her schoolwork, determined not to fall behind. Despite everything that had happened, she still had dreams of graduating and going to college. It was the one thing she had always clung to, the idea that she could build a better future for herself and Isaiah. Emily continued to visit her regularly, checking in to make sure she was okay. Their bond had grown stronger over the past few weeks, and Tasha found herself looking up to the firefighter as a mentor and a friend. One afternoon, as they sat together in the hospital cafeteria, Tasha opened up about her dreams of becoming a nurse. "I've always wanted to help people," she said softly. "I guess that's why I've tried so hard to take care of my mom and Isaiah." Emily smiled, her eyes filled with pride. "You'd make a great nurse, Tasha. You've got the compassion and the strength for it." Tasha blushed, ducking her head. "I'm not sure if I'm strong enough. I feel like I'm barely keeping it together most days." Emily reached across the table, placing a hand on Tasha's arm. "Strength isn't about never struggling. It's about pushing through even when it feels impossible. And that's what you've been doing. You've been fighting for your family, for yourself. That's strength." Tasha smiled, feeling a surge of hope. Maybe she was stronger than she gave herself credit for. Later that day, as she visited Isaiah in the NICU, Tasha found herself feeling more at peace than she had in weeks. Isaiah was getting stronger, and her mom was in treatment, working on getting better. There was still a long road ahead, but for the first time in a long time, Tasha felt like they had a chance. She leaned down and gently touched Isaiah's hand, her heart swelling with love for her little brother. "We're going to be okay," she whispered. "I promise." The hospital smelled like antiseptic, the sterile scent filling Tasha's lungs as she made her way to the NICU once again. It had become a routine. Wake up, visit Isaiah, then spend the rest of the day juggling schoolwork and meetings with Jenna, the social worker. Today, however, felt different. There was a buzz of excitement in the air as she entered the NICU, and she immediately noticed the nurses smiling. As Tasha approached Isaiah's incubator, her heart lifted. The nurses had removed the majority of his breathing tubes. His little body, still tiny and fragile, was no longer tethered to the machines that had been keeping him alive since his birth. It was a huge step, a sign that his lungs were finally strong enough to breathe on their own. "Hey, big guy," she whispered softly, her fingers grazing the clear plastic of the incubator. Isaiah's dark eyes fluttered open, and he looked right at her. It was the first time he had made eye contact, and Tasha's heart nearly burst with joy. Tears welled up in her eyes, but for once, they weren't tears of fear or sadness. They were tears of hope. A nurse approached, her face glowing with pride. "Isaiah's made a lot of progress. He's off oxygen, and we're hoping to try skin-to-skin contact today." Tasha blinked, hardly believing what she was hearing. She had waited so long for this moment, a moment when she could finally hold her brother. "Really?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I can hold him." The nurse nodded. "We'll help you with the positioning, but yes, he's strong enough now." Tasha felt her breath catch in her throat as they gently lifted Isaiah out of the incubator. The nurse showed her how to cradle his tiny body against her chest, making sure he was secure. As soon as Isaiah's skin touched hers, he seemed to relax, his tiny fingers curling into her shirt. Tasha's heart swelled as she held him close, feeling his warmth, his heartbeat. For the first time in what it felt like forever, she allowed herself to hope, really hope, that they were going to make it, that Isaiah was going to survive, and that they were going to have a chance at real life together. "I've got you, Isaiah," she whispered, resting her cheek against his soft head. "We're going to be okay." The air in the courtroom was tense, and Tasha could feel the pressure of 1,000 unspoken words as she sat next to Jenna. Today was the day the judge would decide what would happen to her and Isaiah. It had been weeks since Maya entered rehab, and though she had made progress, this decision could either bring their family back together or pull them apart. Maya sat at the opposite end of the table, her hands trembling in her lap. She looked better, healthier since she had started treatment, but there was still a fragility about her that made Tasha worry. What if the judge didn't think she was ready? What if they ruled that Isaiah and she had to go into foster care permanently? The judge, a stern-faced woman in her 50s, called the room to order. "We are here today to discuss the placement of Isaiah and Tasha Henderson, children of Maya Henderson. I have reviewed the case files and the progress made since Ms. Henderson entered rehabilitation." Tasha's hands clenched in her lap. She wanted to stand up and plead with the judge, to tell her that her mother was trying, that they deserved a chance to stay together, but she knew that it wasn't up to her. All she could do was sit and wait. Jenna stood to speak, her voice calm and professional. "Your Honor, I have been working with Ms. Henderson and her children over the past few weeks. Isaiah remains in the NICU, but his health is improving daily. Tasha has been an exemplary caretaker for her brother and has shown remarkable resilience through these difficult circumstances." Tasha listened as Jenna outlined the plan they had put together for reunification, of how Maya would continue with her treatment program, how Tasha would remain in school and be allowed to visit Isaiah, and how they would gradually work toward bringing the family back under one roof. Jenna's words filled her with hope, but she could see the doubt in the judge's eyes. Then it was Maya's turn to speak. She stood, her hands still shaking, but there was a determination in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "Your Honor," Maya began, her voice quivering at first, "I know I've made mistakes. I know I haven't been the mother I should have been to Tasha and Isaiah. But I'm trying. I'm in treatment. And for the first time in years, I feel like I'm on the right path. I want to be there for my children. I want to make things right." Tasha felt a lump in her throat as her mother spoke. She had heard Maya's promises before, promises to get better, to change. But something about the way she spoke today felt different. She wasn't making excuses or asking for forgiveness. She was simply asking for a chance. The judge leaned forward, her eyes scrutinizing Maya. "Ms. Henderson, your progress in treatment is commendable, but this court is responsible for ensuring the best interests of your children. Are you prepared to continue your recovery while caring for 2 children, one of whom requires extensive medical attention?" Maya nodded, though her voice wavered. "I am, Your Honor. I'm not asking to have them back all at once. I know I have a lot of work to do, and I'm willing to take whatever steps are necessary to prove that I'm ready." The judge was silent for a long moment, her fingers tapping the edge of her desk. The tension in the room was palpable, and Tasha could feel her heart pounding in her chest. Finally, the judge spoke. "This court acknowledges the progress Ms. Henderson has made, but we cannot ignore the fact that these children have been in a precarious situation for some time. I will allow for supervised reunification under the condition that Ms. Henderson continues her treatment and remains compliant with all court-ordered programs." Relief washed over Tasha, and she could see Maya exhale deeply, as if a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. The judge wasn't giving them everything at once, but it was a start. It was a chance. When they left the courtroom, Maya pulled Tasha into a tight embrace, her tears wetting Tasha's shoulder. "We're going to make it, Tasha," Maya whispered, her voice full of emotion. "I'm going to prove to you that I can do this." Tasha hugged her back, tears streaming down her own cheeks. She wanted to believe her mother. She wanted to trust that things were really going to get better this time. Jenna approached them with a small smile, her eyes full of pride. "You both did well in there. The judge's decision is a good step forward. Maya, you'll need to stick with your treatment program and we'll arrange for supervised visits with Isaiah, but this is progress." Maya nodded, wiping her eyes. "I know. I won't let you down." Tasha looked up at her mother, her heart swelling with a mixture of hope and fear. "I believe in you, Mom," she whispered, though part of her still held on to the scars of the past. She had seen her mother fall so many times before, but maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. As they left the courthouse, Emily was waiting for them outside, her face breaking into a wide smile when she saw them. "How did it go?" she asked. Tasha recounted the judge's decision, and Emily pulled her into a hug. "I'm so proud of you, kiddo," she said softly. "You've been so strong through all of this." Tasha smiled, though the weight of the day still hung heavy in her chest. "I'm just glad it's not over," she said. "I don't want to lose Isaiah. I don't want to lose Mom." Emily nodded, her expression serious. "You won't. You've come too far for that." Later that evening, after returning home, Tasha lay in bed, her thoughts swirling. The judge's decision had been a small victory, but she knew there was still a long road ahead. Her mother had a lot of work to do, and Tasha still had her own battles to fight. She had been so focused on holding her family together that she had almost forgotten about her own future. But now, as she stared at the ceiling, she allowed herself to think about it, to dream. Maybe she could still finish school, still go to college, still become the nurse she had always wanted to be. It wouldn't be easy. Nothing about her life had been easy. But for the first time in a long time, it felt possible. A month passed, and slowly, the pieces of Tasha's life began to fall back into place. Maya was continuing with her treatment, attending therapy sessions regularly and working through her recovery. Tasha could see the difference in her. She was more present, more engaged, and for the first time in years, Tasha felt like she had her mother back. Isaiah, meanwhile, continued to grow stronger every day. The doctors were pleased with his progress, and Tasha spent as much time as she could with him at the hospital. The supervised visits were hard, knowing that someone was always watching, always evaluating, but Tasha didn't mind as long as she could be with her brother. One afternoon, Tasha arrived at the hospital to find Maya already there, sitting by Isaiah's incubator. Her face was full of wonder as she watched her son sleep, and for a moment Tasha felt a pang of something she hadn't expected: gratitude. She had spent so much time resenting her mother, blaming her for everything that had gone wrong in their lives. But now, seeing Maya trying so hard to rebuild their family, Tasha realized that her mother had been fighting her own battles all along. "Hey," Tasha said softly as she approached, sitting down beside her mother. "How's he doing today?" Maya smiled, her eyes filled with a kind of warmth Tasha hadn't seen in years. "He's doing well," she said. "The nurses said he might be able to come home soon." Tasha's heart leapt at the news. "Really?" Maya nodded. "They're going to do one more set of tests, but if everything looks good, we could be bringing him home in a week." Tasha felt a surge of joy. The thought of having Isaiah home with them was almost too good to be true. She had spent so long worrying, so long doubting whether they would ever get to this point. But now, it was within reach. As they sat together, watching Isaiah, Tasha turned to her mother. "Mom, I'm proud of you, she said quietly. Maya looked at her, surprised. You are? Tasha nodded. You've come so far. I know it's been hard, but you're doing it. You're really doing it. Maya's eyes welled with tears, and she reached over, squeezing Tasha's hand. I'm proud of you too, Tasha, she whispered. I don't know what I would have done without you. You've been the one holding us all together. Tasha smiled, feeling warmth spread through her chest. For the first time in a long time, it felt like they were really a family again. The day finally came. Isaiah had passed all his tests, and the doctors had given the green light for him to go home. Tasha and Maya arrived at the hospital early, full of nervous excitement as they prepared to take Isaiah home for the first time. The nurses helped them pack up his things, carefully instructing them on how to care for him at home. Tasha listened intently, her heart racing with a mixture of excitement and fear. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for. But it also meant new responsibilities, new challenges. As they left the hospital, Isaiah bundled carefully in his car seat. Tasha couldn't stop smiling. Maya drove them home, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Tasha allowed herself to dream of what their life could be. She imagined quiet evenings at home, Isaiah growing up healthy and strong, and her mother continuing to heal. When they arrived home, Sarah Jenkins was waiting for them, along with Captain Emily, who had become like family over the past few months. They helped Maya and Tasha get Isaiah settled, their smiles full of pride. You did it, Emily said, pulling Tasha into a hug. You really did it. Tasha smiled, tears pricking at her eyes. I couldn't have done it without you. That night, as they sat together in their small apartment, Isaiah sleeping peacefully in his crib, Tasha looked around at the people she loved, her mother, her brother, and the friends who had become family. It wasn't perfect, and it wouldn't always be easy, but for the first time in a long time, Tasha felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. 1 year later, Tasha stood outside her high school, staring up at the large banner that read, Congratulations, Class of 2024. She couldn't believe she had made it. Despite everything that had happened, despite the months of uncertainty, fear, and heartbreak, she had graduated. Beside her, Maya stood proudly, holding Isaiah in her arms. Her mother had been sober for over a year now. The road to recovery had been long and filled with difficult moments, but Maya had stuck with it. For the first time in as long as Tasha could remember, she felt like she had her real mom back. Isaiah, who was now a healthy, smiling 1-year-old, reached out from Maya's arms, grabbing at Tasha's graduation cap. Tasha chuckled and took him into her arms, holding him close. We made it, buddy, she whispered softly. We really made it. The past year had been a whirlwind of growth and healing. After that emotional day in court, Maya had proven to everyone, most importantly to herself, that she was capable of being the mother her children needed. She had continued her recovery program, attending therapy and treatment, and had been fully committed to changing her life. Isaiah's health had steadily improved, and he had finally been able to come home from the hospital. Tasha had thrown herself back into school, determined not to let everything she'd been through stop her from achieving her dreams. She had worked tirelessly, balancing her studies with her responsibilities at home. It hadn't been easy, but today, standing with her diploma in hand, she knew it had all been worth it. You're going to be an amazing nurse, Maya said, her voice filled with pride. You've already saved so many lives, especially ours. Tasha smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. Thanks, Mom. I couldn't have done it without you. Maya's eyes shimmered with tears, but this time they were tears of joy. I'm just so proud of you, Tasha, of the woman you've become. As the graduation ceremony ended, they made their way to the small celebration set up at home. Sarah Jenkins, Captain Emily, and Jenna Perez were all there, friends who had become like family. They had supported Tasha every step of the way, helping her navigate the challenges that had once seemed insurmountable. Emily came over, pulling Tasha into a warm hug. "Look at you, graduate," she said with a proud grin. "You've come so far. You should be proud of yourself." Tasha blushed, ducking her head. "I couldn't have done it without all of you. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." Emily shook her head, her smile softening. "You don't owe us anything, Tasha. You've already repaid us 100 times over by becoming the strong, compassionate person you are. And you're going to do amazing things." As the evening drew to a close, Tasha looked around at the people gathered in the small apartment. Her mother, her brother, her friends, they had all come together in ways she had never expected. Life had been hard, and there would undoubtedly be more challenges ahead. But now, she knew they could face anything, as long as they were together. Later that night, after everyone had left and Isaiah had been tucked into bed, Tasha sat on the couch next to her mother, the weight of the past year slowly lifting from her shoulders. "Mom," she said softly, "I'm proud of you too. I know it wasn't easy, but you never gave up." Maya smiled, tears welling up in her eyes. "I wouldn't have made it without you, Tasha. You're the reason I fought so hard. You gave me a reason to hope again." Tasha leaned over and hugged her mother tightly, feeling the warmth of their bond strengthened with each passing moment. They had been through the fire, but they had come out stronger. As Tasha lay in bed that night, her thoughts drifted to the future. She had been accepted into nursing school, and while the road ahead wouldn't be easy, she knew she had the strength to follow her dreams. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving. The fire that had nearly torn her family apart had also forged something new, a bond that would never be broken. As she drifted off to sleep, Tasha smiled, knowing that whatever came next, they would face it together. Thank you for following Tasha's journey of resilience, love, and second chances. If this story inspired you, be sure to hit that subscribe button for more uplifting and heartfelt stories. Let us know in the comments what part of Tasha's journey resonated with you the most.